Her daughter moved the in-laws in, without asking, without warning. Eleanor Quinn, retired archivist and widow, just smiled and set the table. She didn't argue when they rearranged her living room or claimed her guest suite. 2 weeks earlier, she'd already signed the sale contract in someone else's name. The house was never theirs to claim. And when the notice arrived, no one even saw her hand deliver it. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Ellie Quinn returned home on a Sunday evening, gravel crunching beneath her tires as dusk stretched long across the rooftops of Eugene. The lilacs near the porch were just starting to bloom, her late husband's favorite time of year. She'd spent the weekend with her old book club friend, Judith, in the hills above Corvallis. 3 nights of red wine, jigsaw puzzles, and silence that didn't need to be filled. She carried her tote bag up the steps, keyed open the front door, and froze. There was music playing, not hers. Something jazzy and over-lively, piped faintly through a Bluetooth speaker perched on the sideboard she never used. Shoes were lined up along the baseboard, not hers either. Then came voices, laughter, and the unmistakable rattle of dinner plates being stacked in her kitchen. Ellie stepped inside. Linda Peters, Greg's mother, emerged from the hallway, wearing a plush robe Ellie didn't recognize, and holding a damp towel. "Oh, you're back," she said, like Ellie was the house guest. Behind her, Stan ambled in from the guest suite wing, yawning like a man who'd just enjoyed a long nap in a bed that wasn't his. Samantha entered from the kitchen, holding a glass of wine and a voice laced with false cheer. "Mom, you're early. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." Ellie set her keys in the tray by the door. "What's going on?" "Oh, nothing big," Samantha said breezily, brushing past with practiced dismissal. Greg's parents needed a place for a little while. Their condo sold faster than they thought, and escrow's a mess. It's just temporary. A couple months max. Before Ellie could respond, Greg appeared and placed a sleek silver espresso machine right onto her granite counter with a loud click. It looked wildly out of place next to her pale blue teapot. "Don't worry," he said without looking up. "We'll clean up after ourselves." Ellie blinked once. Then again, in the living room, Linda frowned. "The water pressure in that back bathroom isn't ideal, by the way. Stan says he couldn't even rinse his hair properly." "It's a guest bath," Ellie replied. Linda waved her hand dismissively. "Still, just seems like something that should be updated." Ellie said nothing. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice, just walked quietly to her bedroom, past the laughter, past the espresso machine, past her own daughter's pointed avoidance. That night, after the hallway had gone still and the jazz had finally been silenced, Ellie sat at her writing desk beneath the old Tiffany-style lamp. She opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the lockbox she hadn't touched in months. Inside, the signed sale contract. Finalized, filed, quietly executed under her LLC, with Calvin's name on every page. She ran a finger along the date. Then she opened her laptop and typed without pause. "To Calvin Brandt, subject, green light, proceed. Let's not delay." She hit send, closed the laptop. Outside, the wind rustled through the lilacs. Inside, the espresso machine blinked silently in the dark. Ellie folded the sale contract back into its envelope and placed it atop the dresser. She didn't look back at the guest suite. She wouldn't need to. 2 months earlier, on a damp Wednesday morning in March, Ellie stood beneath the awning of the local post office, watching rain carve tiny rivulets down her windshield. Her umbrella stayed closed. She wasn't made of sugar, and besides, she'd already stepped into the storm. That was the day she handed over the listing papers to Calvin. They met at his small realty office tucked behind the bakery on 6th Street, walls lined with framed photos of historic homes Calvin had placed over the years, each captioned like museum pieces. "Craftsman, bungalow, Queen Anne, sold." Ellie handed him the manila folder. "You're sure?" he asked, though his tone carried no doubt. "More than I've ever been," she said. Calvin opened the folder and nodded. "We'll keep it off the MLS. Private placement only. Your name won't appear anywhere. It'll list as the Evergreen Haven LLC." Ellie nodded. "Make it clean, make it fast." He leaned back in his chair. "You'll have offers within a week." He was wrong. She had 4 within 3 days. Zara's stood out immediately. An all-cash offer, 30-day close, with a simple message attached, looking for peace, not perfection. The woman had visited once, then left without questions. Didn't nitpick, didn't touch the doorknobs like they needed improvement. Just stood at the edge of the garden and took a deep breath. She respects roots, Ellie had said aloud, later, folding the offer sheet in half. Calvin secured the LLC paperwork by the end of the week. A single-member trust, immune to contestation unless someone broke in through federal code, and nobody in Ellie's family even read the warranty manual for the dishwasher. By the time the daffodils bloomed in early April, everything was ready. She hadn't told a soul, not Samantha, not even Emily. The house was legally hers, twice over now, and soon it would no longer be anyone else's to trespass. Back in the present, Ellie moved through her garden with deliberate slowness. The lavender was starting to spread wild, curling toward the stepping stones with gentle rebellion. Her late husband had always trimmed too strictly. She let it grow free now. Unruly wasn't the enemy, entitled was. As she reached the far corner near the fence, she heard Stan's voice drift over from the front yard. "This whole block's going to change," he was telling a neighbor. "We'll be renovating soon. These old houses need control." Control. She didn't speak, didn't step forward, just waited behind the hedge until he went back inside. Later that night, Ellie opened her desktop computer and created a folder labeled "Intentional Misstatements." Inside, she dropped a Word document with the date and a single typed sentence. Stan Peters told Mrs. Hartzell they would be renovating soon, language implying ownership. She saved it, backed it up to a USB, filed both in her safe, beneath the bedroom floorboards. Then she closed the lid on her laptop and looked around the house. Everything still appeared the same: lace curtains, pressed linens, a faint scent of lemon oil from the oak banister, but it wasn't. Legally, contractually, irrevocably, it was already sold. They just didn't know it yet. And Ellie wasn't going to be the one to tell them. Not until they tried to take it. The furniture shift began with what Samantha called just a little rearranging. Ellie walked into the dining room to find her grandmother's cherrywood hutch, dragged 6 inches off-center, angled awkwardly near the wall vent. The matching table had been turned sideways, now parallel to the windows, and one of the antique chairs was missing entirely. "Where's the end chair?" Ellie asked softly. Samantha didn't even look up. She was crouched near the baseboard, tugging the rug into alignment. "We had to move it out. Dad's back can't handle those stiff ones. We're bringing in a recliner tomorrow." "Into the dining room?" "Well, where else would it go?" Samantha stood, brushing her hands on her jeans. "We eat here most nights. It's just for a few weeks. Don't be rigid." Ellie didn't answer. She ran her hand over the hutch's edge, feeling the slight gouge where the wood had caught on something sharp. The next morning, Greg set up his dual-monitor workstation in the sunroom. Cords snaked along the floor, where Emily used to stack her library books. A wireless printer chirped as it connected. Ellie came in holding a watering can and stopped short. "This is where the orchids go," she said. Greg didn't glance up from the screen. "It gets the best light. I'll be taking calls all day, so I need the door closed." Ellie stood there a moment longer, then turned away. She watered the kitchen herbs instead, letting the rosemary soak up the sun her orchids no longer could. That evening, when the house quieted, Ellie took 3 heirloom items: her mother's porcelain teapot, the quilt her great-aunt had stitched during the Depression, and the silver-framed photo of her wedding, and packed them carefully into padded crates. She carried them out to the garden shed under cover of dusk and stored them in a locked chest. No one saw. No one asked. The next day, Emily found her trimming back the rosemary again. She leaned against the porch rail, arms folded. "Why are you so calm?" Ellie glanced up, shielding her eyes against the morning light. "Because calm doesn't mean unaware." Emily tilted her head. "What does it mean?" "It means knowing exactly what's mine and what won't be theirs for long." Inside, Linda hung a framed photo in the hallway. Her Stan, Greg, and Samantha at a beach house rental in Cannon Beach. It dangled crookedly beside Ellie's cross-stitched Oregon map. No one asked where the original family portrait had gone. That afternoon, Ellie stepped out alone. She drove 15 minutes across town to the Alder and Vine Cafe, a place with mismatched mugs and chalkboard menus, tucked between a yarn shop and a used bookstore. She ordered mint tea and took a window seat by the ferns. 10 minutes later, Zara arrived. She wore a soft denim jacket and smelled faintly of sandalwood and road dust. Her camera bag slung casually over one shoulder. "Still good for the original possession date?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from Ellie. "Yes," Ellie said. "But I'd like to shift the walkthrough up a few days." Zara nodded. "Anything I should expect?" Ellie smiled faintly. "Not anything you'll need to clean up." They reviewed logistics, utilities, mailbox forwarding, final inspection timing. When they finished, Zara stood. "You're handling this well." Ellie sipped her tea. "Handling is what women my age do when nobody bothers asking how we feel." Zara looked at her a moment, then offered a hand. Ellie took it. Back at the house, the recliner had arrived. It was wedged between the dining table and the window, its bulk swallowing the corner like ivy. Emily stood nearby, watching it all unfold like a play she already knew the ending to. That night, Ellie opened her email and typed one line to Calvin. "Final walkthrough, move up to Tuesday. I'll clear the path." On Thursday morning, Ellie stood barefoot in the kitchen, cradling a chipped mug of green tea as her inbox dinged. Subject: Deed Confirmation. Evergreen Haven LLC. She clicked it open, eyes scanning line by line. The PDF attachment was stamped with the county seal, the updated deed recorded and indexed. The house now officially belonged to the trust. To the LLC. To her, just not in a name her family would recognize, until it was far too late. No ceremony, no toast, just legality, precise, unfeeling, irreversible. She closed the laptop and turned slowly, letting her eyes settle on the frame of the window over the sink. A hummingbird hovered near the glass for a beat, then flitted away. She set her mug down and walked the house. The cherrywood hutch still leaned crooked, the recliner squatting like a misplaced king in the dining room. Greg's espresso machine hissed even when no one was near it, as if protesting the blandness of its new role. A stack of glossy tech magazines had claimed the sunroom end table where her crocheted coaster used to live. Ellie stepped into the hallway just as the echo of a hammer rang out. Stan stood on a stepladder, anchoring a floating shelf to the wall near the linen closet. "Thought this would be handy for keys and chargers," he said without turning. "Did you ask?" Ellie asked softly. He chuckled like she was joking. "Didn't think I needed to. We're all family here." The word family landed like an oil slick. Ellie walked past him without responding. Down the hall, Samantha stood in the guest room, with her phone pressed to her ear, voice low and bright with curated irritation. "No, it's fine. She doesn't mind. She's just passive. Always has been. Like wallpaper. I mean, she let Dad move out and never even raised her voice." Ellie paused, just for a second. Not out of shock, but to let the silence stretch long enough to be remembered. She walked to her desk, pulled out a single envelope from the drawer, and checked the seal. Still intact, addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Greg Peters, with return address listed only as Evergreen Haven LLC. She drove it to the post office that afternoon, handed it over to the clerk with a request for certified tracking. "Important?" the woman asked. "Very," Ellie replied. Later that evening, the house was unusually quiet. Dinner had been microwaved leftovers, everyone drifting to their respective screens, like satellites with nothing to orbit. Emily passed through the kitchen and paused near the island. A thick white envelope sat in the fruit bowl, unopened. She picked it up and turned it over. "Grandma," she called gently. "This was for Mom and Greg." Ellie stepped into the doorway, drying her hands on a towel. "What's this?" Ellie nodded toward the envelope.
Time.
Emily raised an eyebrow. "Time for what?" Ellie didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward, took the envelope from Emily's hands, and placed it carefully inside the top drawer of the desk by the front window. Then she looked out across the street. where the neighbor's porch light flickered gently to life. "Time to stop pretending this house belongs to anyone else," she said. And just like that, the clock started ticking. The smell of garlic and seared steak lingered longer than it should have. By 6:30, the dining room was set with borrowed polish. Samantha's attempt at elegance via cheap charger plates and string lights taped hastily above the hutch. Ellie had once used only for holidays. The recliner had been moved back to the living room for the night, temporarily banished so Greg's coworkers wouldn't think they were eating in a nursing home. Ellie stayed in the kitchen, not because she wasn't welcome, but because her presence had been carefully edited out. She was taking it easy tonight, Samantha had told guests. She's not much for mingling these days. She could hear everything. Forks clinked against plates. Wine poured freely. Greg laughed too hard at something no one else found funny. Then came Linda's voice, clear, performative, the tone of someone telling a story that had never belonged to them. "This house has been in our family for decades," she said. "It's seen everything. Birthdays, promotions, holidays, heartbreak, generations of Peter's blood, right here in these walls." Ellie froze mid-step. She stood at the edge of the kitchen, just out of sight, a dish towel clutched in her hand. No one noticed. They never looked toward the service. In the hallway, Emily leaned against the banister, phone in hand. She hadn't touched her dinner. When Linda finished her story, Emily lifted her phone, tapped twice, and recorded the moment. She sent the video to Ellie without comment. Just a simple message. "She said it like you died." Ellie read the message, then watched the clip. Linda's smile, Greg nodding, Samantha drinking it in, the room complicit in the performance. Ellie didn't flinch. She wiped her hands, set the towel down, and walked toward the dining room, not through the hallway, but the long way, around through the living room, so she emerged behind Greg just as he raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said, beaming. Right where they belong. There was a smattering of polite laughter, the sound of glasses lifted to meet his toast. Ellie didn't speak until the room had gone quiet again, plates nearly cleared, and no one paying attention to the woman who had once owned every beam beneath their feet. Then she said, without raising her voice, "Some beginnings are actually endings." Heads turned. A few forks paused mid-air. Samantha blinked. "Mom." Ellie looked at no one in particular, just the flowers on the table, faux peonies in a glass vase she hadn't seen in years. Then she turned, walked back into the kitchen, and stepped out the side door into the night. The wind had picked up. It rustled the maple leaves and creaked the fence gate loose on its hinges. Ellie stood beneath the porch light for a long minute. Her phone buzzed, from Calvin Brandt title officially transferred to Evergreen Haven LLC. Escrow closed, records filed. "Congratulations," Ellie smiled faintly. The guests inside laughed again, off-key, off-cue, unaware that they were celebrating a house they no longer owned and a future that would never arrive for them. Inside, the dining room shimmered with string lights and delusion. Outside, Ellie reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded notice she'd drafted that afternoon. 10-day termination. She'd print it tomorrow. The legal clock wouldn't wait anymore. The morning after the dinner party dawned too bright for comfort. Clear sunlight filtering through the kitchen blinds, spotlighting fingerprints on the fridge and smudges on the granite Ellie used to polish weekly. It was the kind of quiet that came after something subtle but irreversible had cracked. Ellie rose early. She dressed with purpose, soft cardigan, comfortable slacks, pearl studs in her ears, not for presentation, but precision. She made coffee the old way, percolator hissing gently on the stove, while the household still slept off its wine and smugness. Then she sat at her desk. She opened her laptop, navigated to the folder marked Evergreen Haven LLC, and double-clicked the template Calvin had helped her draft months ago. 10-day notice to vacate. Non-tenant occupants. Her name didn't appear anywhere, just the LLC's address. The legal language. The terms spelled out in language no one could twist with sentiment or denial. She printed 4 copies, one for Samantha, one for Greg, one for Linda and Stan, and one for her file. Each paper slid out of the printer with the weight of something final. She stacked them, clipped them together with a binder clip, and walked quietly into the kitchen. The espresso machine sat idle, a smug chrome monolith among her blue and white china. Ellie placed the notices on the breakfast table, centered, visible, unmistakable. Then she slipped on her walking shoes and stepped out through the side door. She didn't need to be present for the moment. She'd already lived through too many of them. It was Greg who found the letter first, sometime after 10. His laugh echoed off the tile as he waved the papers like a prop in a bad improv scene. "Is this supposed to be funny?" he called out. Ellie had returned and was clipping the rose bushes outside. She didn't look up. Greg opened the back door. "Ellie, this eviction notice? It's got your address, but not your name. What the hell is Evergreen Haven?" Ellie stood, brushed thorns from her gloves. "That's my trust. It owns the house now." Samantha rushed out behind him, paper crumpled in one hand, the other clutching her phone like a lifeline. "Mom, what is this?" Her voice teetered between panic and rage. "You're evicting us? You didn't even talk to us." Ellie tilted her head. "You didn't talk to me when you moved them in." "But we're family," Samantha whispered, as if the word alone should undo everything. Ellie's voice was even. "You said I was wallpaper." Samantha opened her mouth, then shut it. From the kitchen, Linda barreled through, waving her copy. "This is cruelty," she snapped. "We're seniors. You'll have blood on your hands if we end up displaced." Ellie didn't blink. "You've been housed on my goodwill for 3 months. That ends in 10 days. This is vindictive," Linda hissed. "No," Ellie replied, turning back toward her roses. "Just quiet for too long." The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was stunned, burning stillness, the kind that arrives right before the floodwaters rise. Emily stepped out onto the porch. She hadn't said a word yet, but her phone was in her hand again. Camera app open. Linda turned. "You recording us?" Emily didn't flinch. "Just preserving truth." Inside the house, the espresso machine gurgled to life again. No one had touched it. The printer light blinked. Something permanent had shifted. 10 days had never sounded so generous. By Sunday morning, the house was no longer pretending. There was no more laughter over brunch, no soft jazz from Linda's Bluetooth speaker, no passive-aggressive compliments about Ellie's quirky decor. The walls had gone still, like they were waiting for something final. Ellie spent the morning in the study, blinds angled just enough to let the light slant across her desk. Beside her mug sat a labeled accordion folder, neatly tabbed. Title, trust documents, communication logs, notice of escrow closure, Evergreen Haven LLC, certificate of formation. She flipped through each with surgical calm, printed duplicates, backed up scans to an encrypted flash drive. The digital timestamps were crisp, unarguable. Her paper trail didn't just speak, it rendered rebuttal irrelevant. Outside the office door, Greg paced like a caged animal. His voice low but tightening. "I've called 3 times. It goes straight to voicemail," he snapped. Ellie didn't have to look up to know what was happening. Greg stormed into the hallway, phone still pressed to his ear. "Calvin Brandt. That guy's a fraud if he's not even willing to." He stopped short, listening to the void on the other end. "You've reached the voicemail of Calvin Brandt Realty. Please leave." "Damn it." He jabbed the end call button, then muttered, "She's hiding behind a company that doesn't even exist." Ellie emerged from the study, holding the folder, expression neutral. "It exists, and so does the trust. You'd know that if you read anything before plugging in that espresso machine." Greg turned, red in the face. "You're seriously going to make us leave?" "No," Ellie said, walking past him. "The LLC is. I'm just following instructions." Samantha caught her in the kitchen moments later, voice raw. "Mom, please. We just need time. We didn't know this was serious." Ellie paused, folding a clean dish towel. "You gave your in-laws more courtesy than you gave me. You made space for them. You asked for nothing from me." "That's not true," Samantha said, voice cracking. "I just assumed. That's the problem." Ellie's tone was quiet but slicing. "You assumed I was a piece of furniture, something to lean on until it's inconvenient." Samantha's eyes welled, but Ellie didn't soften. "Not this time." Across the hall, a cabinet door slammed hard, Linda's protest echoing like a shot through the bones of the house. Ellie didn't flinch. "Tell your husband to fix the door he just unhinged," she said without turning. Stan entered from the foyer, huffing, adjusting the collar of his polo shirt like it itched. "I'm getting a lawyer," he said, as if that line were a sword. Ellie didn't bother looking up from her folder. "That's your right. Just make sure he reads the deed before he charges you for a consultation." Stan stared at her for a beat longer, then turned and left, keys jangling like applause, meant only for himself. By mid-afternoon, Emily came into the room with 2 empty boxes and a quiet look. "Where do you want to start?" she asked. Ellie nodded toward the shelves near the fireplace. "Let's do the photo albums first. The ones with glue instead of tabs." They worked in silence for a while. Not cold, just steady. At one point, Emily lifted a small glass snow globe, one Ellie had picked up in Vermont years ago, and turned it in her hand. "You think they'll fight this?" "They'll try," Ellie said. "But feelings don't override filings." Emily wrapped the globe in a dishcloth, then placed it gently in the box. "Good." The grandfather clock ticked behind them, a beat slower than it used to be, the kind of rhythm you noticed only when the house got quiet enough to hear the truth. Ellie looked toward the window. The wind had picked up again. Rain was coming. Something was going to break, and she was more than ready for the storm. By Monday morning, the weather turned overcast, stubborn, the kind of Oregon gray that made every room seem dimmer, no matter how wide the blinds were drawn. Ellie was in the garden shed, rewrapping her Depression-era quilts in cedar tissue, when the door banged open. "They're threatening legal action," Emily said, holding her phone like it had burned her hand. Ellie didn't even turn. "Of course they are." Inside, Samantha's group text had flared to life, vague threats of contesting ownership and improper filing. Greg had CC'd some contact named Don or Real Estate, who replied with the legal equivalent of a shrug. By mid-afternoon, Calvin sent Ellie a short email, forwarded full LLC trust agreement to the parties. All documents verified and notarized. No vulnerabilities. Rock solid. Attached was a scanned cover letter, written in Calvin's no-nonsense serif font, as crisp as a cease and desist, but more damning in its calm. Ownership transferred legally and irrevocably to Evergreen Haven LLC. Occupants were not granted tenancy. No lease exists. No rights apply. Samantha printed it. Greg scribbled on it. Stan, pacing, declared war. "You blindsided your own daughter," he said, loud enough to echo down the hallway, where Ellie sat sewing a torn hem by the laundry window. She looked up, slow and deliberate. "No," she replied. "I warned you, you just didn't understand the language." "This is betrayal," Stan snapped. Ellie stood, smoothing the fabric in her lap. "Betrayal," she repeated, "is making yourself at home in a place you never asked to enter." Stan turned red, but there was nowhere else to go. Not in argument, not in geography. The next day, Linda made her move. It happened at church. Sunday service, the one Ellie had attended quietly for 41 years. Linda cornered 3 of the older ladies after communion, voice pitched perfectly for the foyer echo. Can you believe it? Kicking out her own daughter. "And us, seniors, just for control." I told Stan something changed in her after her husband passed. Some bitterness just curdled. The women murmured. One offered a vague, "Well, that's unfortunate." Another shifted her purse strap awkwardly. Ellie didn't need to hear it directly. Word traveled faster than sermons in Eugene. But this time, she wasn't the one to answer. Emily did. She stepped out from behind the coat rack, phone in hand. "She's not bitter," she said calmly. "She's just done pretending kindness means silence." Linda blinked. "Excuse me, she never needed your permission." Emily said, louder now. "You just assumed she didn't need protecting. But she does. From you." Gasps from the choir director. A stunned silence from Pastor Rick. Ellie, seated on the back pew, didn't move. She just tucked her hands in her lap and closed her eyes, letting her granddaughter do what daughters once should have. That night, Emily sat beside her at the kitchen table, legs curled under her, watching Ellie label boxes in cursive. "Are you afraid?" she asked. Ellie didn't look up, only of letting this house finish the story someone else tried to write. The doorbell rang. Ellie didn't flinch. Emily stood to answer it, but Ellie raised a hand. No, let it ring. The porch light flickered once, as if in agreement. Outside, a car idled too long in the driveway. Inside, Ellie reached for a fresh folder labeled Sheriff's Notice Preparation. She slid it across the table. It wasn't fear on her face. It was readiness. By Wednesday morning, the house had thinned, not in occupancy, but in illusion. The silence now was different, no longer accidental or polite. It had edges, friction, the kind of quiet that followed slammed doors and unsent text drafts. Stan took the first swing. He called Calvin directly from the front porch, pacing in socks and a vest he hadn't zipped all the way. Emily sat inside, earbuds in, pretending not to listen as he shouted into the phone like volume would summon authority. She's got no right. You hear me? This isn't just some hobby property. This is a family residence. I've got connections. And if you think for a second, whatever else he meant to say was cut short by Calvin's answer. His voice, calm, clipped, unbothered, traveled easily through the phone's speaker. Mr. Peters, he said, your daughter-in-law doesn't own that house. Your son doesn't own it. Ellie Quinn doesn't even own it. Evergreen Haven LLC does. And guess who controls that? A pause. Then, with brutal finality, she does. She owns everything. Good luck with the threat. Click. Stan stood there for a beat, phone still in hand, before pocketing it like a detonator that had failed to go off. Inside, Samantha sat at the dining table, tears streaking down her face, one hand clenched around a coffee spoon, the other gripping her phone. You're spiteful, she choked. Eyes locked on Ellie, who stood calmly in front of the open pantry. You're punishing all of us. For what? Ellie didn't answer. She just began pulling items from the shelves. Canned peaches, jasmine rice, a bottle of vanilla extract older than Emily. Each item was placed in a paper bag, then tied shut. Systematic, clean. You're emptying the kitchen? Samantha said. Seriously? I'm removing what belongs to me, Ellie replied. That includes the groceries I paid for? From the stairwell, Greg appeared, phone in hand. I left you messages, he said, low and tight. You didn't respond. Ellie didn't stop packing. I don't listen to voicemails I didn't ask for. He blinked. You're being cruel. She handed him a bag of lentils. I'm being clear. That afternoon, Ellie shut the door to the master bedroom and turned the lock with a quiet click. She placed the key on a ribbon, looped it around her wrist, and returned to her desk. Emily knocked on the frame softly. I started packing my room, she said. Ellie looked up, surprised for the first time that day. Where are you going? Emily held up a canvas bag full of books. With you, wherever you land next. I'm not staying here with people who treat you like inventory. Ellie stood slowly. That's not a light choice. Emily shrugged, eyes steady. Neither is forgetting who raised you. Upstairs, Linda muttered to herself, loud enough to be heard but too soft to confront. Greg slammed the guest bathroom door once. Then again, no one said why. That night, Ellie sat in bed with her laptop open, a fresh folder labeled Move-in Sequence on her desktop. Her phone buzzed. A picture from Zara, a simple core doormat with raised lettering. Welcome home, handwritten in chalk script, still drying on the edge. Ellie smiled. Outside, the porch light flickered again. She didn't rise to fix it. Downstairs, Greg's voice could be heard in bursts, rage pressed into voicemails, one after another, 7 in total, then 8. Then silence. Ellie reached over, unplugged her phone from the charger, and one by one deleted every message. No fanfare, no second listen. She closed the laptop, drew the quilt up over her legs, and leaned back into the pillows. Tomorrow she'd start labeling what went into storage and what went into history. And history, she decided, no longer required their signatures. The morning arrived without apology. A soft blue light spilled across the hardwood floors, and for the first time in weeks the house was completely still, not the kind of stillness that waits to be broken, but the kind that settles in once the outcome is inevitable. Ellie rose before the sun breached the neighbor's fence line. She wrapped a knit shawl around her shoulders and brewed her tea without haste. No espresso machine hissed. No phones vibrated. Even the refrigerator seemed to hum more softly, as if honoring the weight of the hour. She stepped onto the porch, mug in hand. The air was damp but clean, the kind of Oregon morning that reminded you the earth never stopped trying to begin again. The roses were still in bloom. The lavender nodded gently in the breeze. Ellie walked slowly down the steps, hand trailing the banister her husband once sanded smooth. Her slippers padded quietly across the slate path, then stopped. She turned, took it in. The house. Her house. The one she'd protected silently, methodically, while everyone else played at claiming it with noise. Behind her, the screen door creaked. Emily stepped out, dragging a suitcase behind her, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She was still in pajama bottoms, hair loosely tied, eyes blinking against the light. "Didn't want to miss this," she said. Ellie smiled, nodding once. They stood together for a moment, not talking, not needing to. The front door opened a few minutes later, with more force. Greg stepped out in jeans and a rumpled t-shirt, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He didn't speak to them, just walked toward the side of the house and lit a cigarette like he hadn't quit 6 years ago. Back inside, voices rose. Linda refusing, her tone a mixture of disbelief and insult, as if someone had canceled her subscription to comfort without warning. "I won't be bullied into packing," she said. "It's beneath me." Greg, having shed the last layers of performative patience, snapped. "Then I'll do it, Mom. Just stay out of the damn way." Boxes thumped, drawers slammed. Ellie didn't go in. She stayed with Emily on the porch, watching the light rise higher up the trunk of the old cedar in the yard. A car pulled up to the curb, a nondescript county sedan. The sheriff stepped out, paperwork in hand, his badge dulled slightly from decades of duty. He knocked once. No one answered. So he tacked the notice gently to the front door. Official, final, and entirely unignorable. Stan watched from the window, lips parted but silent. For the first time, something in his posture folded. A man used to angles, now rounding at the edges. He turned from the glass and walked away like someone suddenly aware he'd overstayed at a table where the check had already been paid. Inside, Samantha collapsed onto the couch. Her hands trembled as she picked up the folded copy of the deed Calvin had sent days ago, the one she'd pretended not to read. Now she held it like an obituary. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but not for Ellie, not even for Stan or Linda, just for the house. The illusion she had mistaken for permanence. Ellie watched through the porch window, her face unreadable. Her phone buzzed once. Zara, truck just left. ETA 45 minutes. Ellie turned to Emily. "You ready?" she asked. Emily nodded. "Always." The birds began to sing. A breeze swept through the porch lattice. The front door, still ajar, creaked softly on its hinges. And for the first time in 3 long months, Ellie didn't feel like a guest in her own life. The moving truck rumbled down the street just past 9. Its diesel breath puffed clouds into the cool morning air as it slowed in front of the Craftsman house, tires hissing softly against the curb. Zara stepped out first. She wore jeans cuffed at the ankles, a chambray shirt, and hiking boots that still carried a layer of desert dust. Her camera bag was slung across her chest, like armor. She looked up at the porch, at Ellie and Emily standing side by side, and offered a nod that said everything without a single word. Ellie descended the steps slowly, her hand trailing the rail. Emily followed, already reaching for one of the smaller boxes nestled just inside the truck's open cargo door. They made no ceremony of it. No speeches, no rituals, just quiet movement. A transfer not of things, but of intention. Ellie walked Zara through the house room by room. "This is the sunroom," she said softly, guiding her past the windows Greg had once claimed as his Zoom backdrop. "Best light in the house, especially around 4. Zara ran her fingers along the windowsill. You can tell the house was loved. Still is, Ellie replied. They moved through the dining room next, where a single chair remained tucked beneath the table. The recliner was gone. Ellie had had it hauled off the night before, left on the curb without a word. This one was mine, Ellie said, patting the chair. But it's ready to become someone else's. Zara smiled faintly. It already feels like it's mine. In the hallway, Linda appeared like a last shadow, arms crossed, eyes wild, suitcase half-zipped beside her. We're not finished packing, she snapped. Ellie didn't pause. You've had 3 months. We thought you were bluffing. We didn't think it'd come to this. Ellie turned. You didn't think at all. Linda stepped forward, lowering her voice. It's cruel. What kind of person puts out family like this? Ellie met her gaze squarely. The kind who finally knows the difference between guilt and boundaries. Linda opened her mouth to protest again, but Zara's presence behind Ellie gave her pause. A stranger, watching, a witness. Linda stepped back. Out front, Calvin's silver sedan pulled up beside the truck. He emerged with his ever-present leather folio and a coffee from a gas station that somehow never spilled. His expression was unreadable, but his pace was brisk. He shook Ellie's hand first, then Zara's. Final paperwork, he said, opening the folio. Sign here, here, and initial the possession transfer. Zara clicked her pen without hesitation. Greg hovered on the porch now, arms limp at his sides, the last box in his hand, like he'd forgotten why he picked it up. Samantha didn't come out. Stan sat in the idling SUV, engine running, radio off, staring straight ahead. When Zara signed the final line, Calvin took a breath, closed the folder, and said, "It's done." Zara turned toward Ellie. "Would you stay for a little while?" Ellie shook her head gently. "This house has hosted enough versions of me." Zara nodded. She didn't push. As Ellie walked toward the garden gate, Emily jogged ahead and reached for the iron latch. She swung it wide, letting her grandmother pass first. Then she stepped through, closed it behind them, and pulled the bolt into place with a quiet click. Linda watched from the porch as if the sound were a gunshot. Emily turned to Ellie. "Where to?" Ellie smiled. "Home." Behind them, the house that once belonged to everyone but her faded slowly into the morning sun. And up on the porch, the new owner knelt and placed a fresh potted plant by the front step, lavender, rooted, unmoved. They never looked back. The new cottage sat at the far edge of town, just past a rusted split-rail fence where wild clover grew without permission. It was one story, painted a soft gray with white trim, and came with no memories baked into the walls. That was the point. Ellie stepped onto the front stoop that first morning alone, tea in one hand, keys in the other, the door swinging open without a single creak, no ghosts, no inherited guilt. Just clean air and the smell of fresh pine from the crate of kindling that Calvin had left by the hearth as a housewarming gift. The hardwood floors were pale and sun-struck. The curtains she'd chosen were cotton, unfussy and light enough to stir with the breeze. In the corner of the living room, her grandmother's teapot now rested on a floating shelf beside the Depression-era quilt she'd draped over the arm of a chair. Every placement was deliberate, not sentimental, not reactionary, intentional. By late afternoon, Emily had claimed the back bedroom and filled it with the scent of cinnamon candles and the rustle of her favorite paperbacks. She'd chosen light green paint for the walls, peaceful, not boring, she'd explained, and had already arranged her growing collection of art prints in a staggered collage above the desk. "You don't mind me being here?" she'd asked earlier, kneeling on the floor, sorting socks. Ellie had smiled. "I think the house prefers it." Mail came just after 3. A plain envelope with Calvin's return address, marked personal and confidential in block letters. Ellie brought it to the kitchen table, slid it open with the letter opener she hadn't used in a decade, and pulled out a single folded check. "The sale proceeds. Made out to Eleanor Quinn, not Evergreen Haven LLC. Not as trustee, not as executor. Just her name, clean and direct." She held it for a long moment, not for the amount, it was generous, but for what it meant. Control, returned. Not inherited, not negotiated, chosen. Beneath it, Calvin had handwritten a note. It's rare to see someone finish something the right way. You did. The next day, a second delivery came. A square box wrapped in recycled paper, no return address, but Ellie knew the handwriting. She opened it carefully. Inside, a bouquet of fresh sunflowers and sage, tied with twine, and a small envelope with thick paper folded inside. Zara's note read, "Thank you for the roots. I'll grow them well." Ellie placed the bouquet in an old mason jar and set it by the kitchen window. The flowers tilted toward the glass, as if grateful for direction. That evening, Emily helped her slide a new fireproof safe beneath the floorboards of the linen closet. Inside it, Ellie placed 3 items: the final deed to the cottage, in her name; the trust closure document from Calvin, stamped and notarized; the original Evergreen Haven LLC file, labeled in permanent marker, closed. She shut the safe with a firm hand and turned the key until it clicked, locking away every trace of the war she'd just won. When she rose, she didn't sigh, didn't linger. She just turned off the light, stepped into her living room, and let the quiet settle like music. Outside, a wind picked up, but inside, nothing moved without her permission. The office smelled faintly of cedar and toner ink, familiar, crisp, and entirely unremarkable. That was how Ellie preferred it. She sat across from Calvin in his private conference room, a space filled with nothing sentimental, just contracts, clean-lined furniture, and a quiet view of the courthouse across the street. A place where decisions lived in black and white, not guilt and memory. The revised will sat before her in a manila folder, tabbed and initialed in 3 places already. All that remained was her signature. Calvin passed her the pen. "Everything's in here. The cottage, the residuals from the sale, and the remainder of the Evergreen Haven Trust, fully dissolved and converted to direct inheritance." "You're sure?" Ellie didn't hesitate. She signed. Under beneficiaries removed. 4 names had been lined through in thick red type: Samantha Quinn Peters, Gregory Allen Peters, Stanley Peters, Linda Marie Peters. In the space labeled sole beneficiary, there was just one name: Emily Quinn Blake. Her granddaughter, the one who saw her before she disappeared. Calvin slid the documents into a sealed envelope and stamped it with the notary seal. The sound echoed like a gavel. "It's done," he said. Back home, Ellie addressed a single envelope in her tidy script. To Samantha Quinn Peters, no return address. Just a single line inside on thick paper, all ties severed. "Do not contact again. This is final. EQ." She walked it down herself to the blue mailbox at the edge of the post office parking lot, slid it in, waited for the soft thunk of closure. 3 days later, Greg's attempt to respond arrived, a puffy envelope with his handwriting on the corner. It never made it past Ellie's gate. Calvin had already filed a mail forwarding block. It was marked "Refused," returned to sender in black ink, and left at Greg's doorstep like a ghost that wouldn't be entertained. That same afternoon, Ellie met with her estate attorney, a younger woman with sharp eyes and a sharper sense of permanence. "I want a no-contact clause," Ellie said, handing over the names. "In the event of death or medical emergency, I don't want these individuals notified. No visits, no access, not even a footnote." The attorney didn't blink. "We can file that today. It's enforceable." Ellie smiled. "That's the idea." That evening, she returned home just as the sun folded itself behind the pines, casting long shadows through the cottage windows. Emily was in the kitchen, unpacking a box labeled "Winter," humming softly. A fresh stack of books rested beside the sink. The mason jar flowers were still alive, sunflowers holding their posture like soldiers who'd weathered something worth remembering. Ellie walked to the closet, opened the fireproof safe, and slid the revised will inside. When she closed the lid and locked it, she did not feel lighter. She felt clear. Emily peeked her head in. "Dinner in 20. You okay?" Ellie nodded. "I'm better than okay." On the counter, the tea kettle began to hum. Outside, the world spun on, unbothered, unburdened. And inside a quiet home in the woods, one woman had officially done what most only dream of. She rewrote her ending with no apologies. And this time, no one else had a pen. The gallery was tucked behind a florist on 8th Avenue, with floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the last amber streaks of evening sun. Inside, whitewashed brick walls framed Zara's photos like open hands, each piece anchored with silence, not spectacle. Ellie stepped in slowly, fingers brushing Emily's sleeve as they crossed the threshold. Her boots tapped softly on the polished concrete floor. There was no sign pointing to the feature wall. There didn't need to be. The room bent around it like breath around a flame. Zara's exhibit was titled Inheritance. In the center, lit by a single overhead bulb, hung the photo Ellie hadn't known existed. A cracked porcelain teacup rested on a weathered porch rail. One hairline fracture snaked from rim to base, held together by the pressure of memory and morning dew. The caption beneath it, etched in simple white block, survived. Ellie stared for a long time. She hadn't seen that teacup since she packed it away the week before the house changed hands. She hadn't known Zara had photographed it. She hadn't known it was her porch rail until she looked closely and saw the garden gate in the blur of the background. She used a long lens, Ellie murmured. Emily nodded, eyes flicking to the artist's statement nearby. Listen to this, she said softly, reading aloud. To those who took nothing and built everything. To the ones erased who never erased themselves. To the quiet. Ellie's breath caught in her throat, not because of what the words said, but because of how many things they didn't have to. The dedication plaque was smaller, tucked beside the guest book. Dedicated to EQ. You taught me how to leave what tried to hold me. Ellie's initials were the only thing that gave her away. Zara appeared beside them, silent until she wasn't. I wanted it to speak without shouting, she said. Ellie turned. It does. They hugged, short and firm, like people who respected boundaries even when affection ran deep. Zara's scent was still sandalwood and sun, like dried rosemary crushed in a palm. Across the room, Calvin approached, blazer open, camera slung awkwardly over one shoulder like a borrowed identity. I'm usually the one sending contracts, not walking into galleries, he said. But damn if this doesn't beat escrow closings. Emily grinned. Want a picture? Calvin hesitated, then nodded. Might be the only time I get to stand next to three women who could run a revolution with spreadsheets. They posed together beneath the photo of the teacup. Zara didn't smile, but her eyes softened. Emily leaned into Ellie's side. Calvin threw up a peace sign. Ironic but oddly fitting. After, as the gallery buzzed with low conversation and clinking glasses, Ellie stepped away toward the corner window. She looked out over the city's slow drift into twilight. Buses wheezing at stops, neon signs flickering to life, a young couple arguing quietly on the corner in that way people do when the love isn't gone, just tired. Emily joined her. Thinking about the old house, Ellie shook her head. It's strange, she said, voice steady. I don't miss it. Emily didn't press, she just linked arms. Behind them, another visitor stepped up to view survived. They tilted their head, reading the caption, then the dedication, then stepped back, as if they'd seen something more than they expected. The exhibit lights dimmed slightly, drawing the crowd forward. Outside, rain began to fall, light and harmless. But inside, surrounded by truth and paper, and people who understood, nothing felt heavier than it needed to. Ellie exhaled, not like someone letting go, but like someone finally breathing on her own. The morning light was kind, the way it curved through the trees and landed on the rosemary hedge Ellie had planted herself. Bees moved between blossoms like punctuation marks, small, soft, essential. She stepped barefoot onto the flagstone path in her front garden, mug in hand, flannel robe trailing behind her like a quiet banner. The dew kissed her toes. The breeze smelled of damp soil and lemon balm. Nothing had been disturbed overnight. Not the plants, not the boundaries. The fence held. So did she. The cottage stood behind her, small and certain. On its southern wall, above the mailbox, hung a discreet black plaque with brushed silver lettering. Property of E. Quinn Family Trust, 2025. It had arrived the week before, custom engraved, exactly as requested. She'd mounted it herself with brass screws and no audience. Inside, beneath her bed, the fireproof box rested, unassuming, heavy in the way only peace could be. Inside it, her deed, her trust, her legacy, untouched, sealed, final. Emily was in the guest room, packing. She moved like someone preparing to leave, but not escape. College orientation in Seattle was only 3 days away. A dorm room waited. So did a blank canvas. Ellie paused in the doorway. "How's it going?" Emily looked up, one foot tucked under her as she sat on the floor, surrounded by folded t-shirts and annotated novels. "Almost done. I just have to decide which coffee mug makes the cut." Ellie smiled. "Bring the green one. It holds up best in chaos." Emily stood, crossed the room, and hugged her without being asked. "I'll visit every month, even if I have to sleep on the floor." Ellie smoothed her granddaughter's hair. "You'll have a key. Floors are for strangers." They packed the last of the books together, in silence that didn't ache. After Emily left to run errands, Ellie returned to the front porch and checked the mail. One envelope stood out, heavy paper, dark ink. It was from Zara. Inside, another handwritten note, short and ink-smudged. "Best roots I've ever bought. Sunlight's hitting the teacup just right. You were always the storm in the shelter. Love, Z." Ellie slipped the card between the pages of a book on her end table. Then she stepped into her new rocking chair, the one Emily had assembled for her as a housewarming gift, and settled back with her tea. It was mint and honey today, the kind you sip slowly, not because you need to stall anything, but because nothing is chasing you anymore. Birdsong hummed through the open window. The screen door creaked once, but no one entered. The air moved with permission. The land held steady beneath her. Somewhere far off, a child laughed. A screen door slammed. A dog barked. But none of it came from inside her fences. Her home had no intruders, no false claims, no visitors overstaying. Just her. Ellie looked down at her porch railing, traced the line where old wood met new. Then she whispered, more to the land than to herself. "They moved in like I didn't exist. I left," she sipped her tea, "and made sure they never would again."